Okay, welcome everybody to this Heradox webinar. We're going to be talking about best practices for digitizing documents. My name is Kristen Anton. I'm the Community Knowledge Manager for Heradox, and I'll be facilitating and hosting this discussion. So this community discussion is an opportunity for practitioners, information wranglers, and technologists to share their experiences, knowledge, and advice on digitizing documents. There are a few different ways that people can interact with each other throughout this month on this topic. The first is this webinar that we're all on, and we're hosting a second webinar next week on Thursday, and that's at 1300 UTC. And we're also hosting an online discussion forum we have a few threads that are on this topic, and we encourage you all to join there because it doesn't matter what time zone you're in or where you're based. Anybody can log in and share their experiences and their knowledge and their questions. This is what it looks like when you get there. We're calling it the Heradox Collaboratory, and the URL is here, collaboratory.heradox.org. So I encourage everybody on the call and everybody watching this recording to go ahead and take a look at the discussion that's happening on the forum. We really want to encourage people to participate over the next 2 weeks. Okay, so a little bit of housekeeping information before we get started. This webinar is public and it's being recorded, so please be careful what you share. Don't share any sensitive information or identifiable information about people. And we will write a summary that will be posted on the Heradox website after this is finished. If you have any questions throughout the presentations, please share those through the chat in ReadyTalk. It should be in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And at the end, we're hoping to have about 20 minutes time for questions and discussion. And at that time, if you want to share something, please raise your hand. Okay, so why are we talking about digitizing documents? When we talk about digitizing documents, we're talking about taking physical paper documents and making them into a digital format. This is an image of, it's from the Heradag website, and it's a picture of an office. I forget which country this is in. The Guatemala National Police Archive. So Heradag had their work cut out for them when they were tasked to take these documents and organize them and make sense of them. So human rights organizations should be interested in digitizing documents, especially if they have a room full like this. Digitizing documents improves access to your information. It allows you to share your information with anybody. It improves the access to the information in that way by sharing it. Whether you're building an online public library to share documents related to corruption, or perhaps you're making documents more searchable for your team. Also, digitizing documents helps you to preserve and protect important human rights information. There are many human rights defenders that run the risk that malevolent groups seeking to destroy or confiscate witness testimony, evidence of abuse, and other sensitive information. You might also be running the risk that your documents are subject to harmful storage conditions such as humidity, insects, and rodents. So these are just a few reasons why a human rights group might want to digitize their documents, and the presenters might have a lot of other reasons to share as well. So in this webinar today, we're going to discuss important considerations when it comes to digitizing your documents, some of the common pitfalls that practitioners have seen so that you can avoid them, scanner and software recommendations to get to the really practical information, and then some other advice for people who are just starting out with this. Our presenters today include Yasmin Shash. She has experience digitizing documents for NGOs. She'll be sharing the basic challenges of human rights and legal documentation digitization. We also have Nicole Friedman, And she's worked with many different organizations and institutions on digitization, and she's particularly interested in human rights. And she'll be sharing an overview of digitization, that's really hard to say, and some general advice. Then we have Elizabeth Baumgartner of Swiss Peace. She's a lawyer specialized in international criminal law and transitional justice, and she's also the co-head of the Dealing with the Past program. And we have Bert Verstappen on the call as well, and at the very end, he'll be sharing some of his experiences working with organizations on digitization projects. He's the senior documentalist for HeroDocs.
Yes, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, great.
Okay, start again. My name is Nicole Friedman, and I'm an information management and archival practitioner. I've worked both in traditional archives, some less traditional archives, as well as for various NGOs. So today I'm just going to be giving kind of an overview of how a digitization project might look like, some things to take into consideration, a little bit of the nitty-gritty, but not too much, as it varies from project to project. So the first question I think that you have to start out with, and every organization should ask themselves, is why are we digitizing documents? It's really the first place you have to start. I think you need to have some sort of idea of where the digital items will be going, what they will be used for, and how you're gonna keep them either internally within your organization, how you're going to disseminate them, etc. So, there's a couple different reasons. I mean, there's many reasons why an organization might want to digitize their documents. And the first is for information dissemination, especially for organizations working with human rights. This can be really important. Maybe they're for online publication, for information sharing with external organizations, or even to reproduce in print publication. Another one is just to maintain information internally, to share with, let's say, offices in other countries or colleagues, even in a single building. It can be for research or knowledge sharing, or even in the future supporting documentation, for example, in legal cases, or just for institutional memory. And the last, as I could see it, is for long or longer term preservation, or just flat out protection of the documents. In the past, I've worked with organizations where it wasn't necessarily so safe to keep paper documents in a single location, so digitizing was kind of a way to get around this. So the first step for any digitization project, once you figure out why you're digitizing, is to plan. It's quite easy to just say, I have some documents here, I want to make them digital, let's get a scanner and let's start. But if you go that way, then I think you're going to encounter a lot of difficulties along the way. So I kind of have here a little graphic about needs and constraints. So any of these can influence the other, and it's really important to figure out early on what your limitations are, what's the most important to you, what you can't live without. So like any other project. And, these needs or constraints can be financially related, space related in terms of how much space do you actually have to store your digital documents, human resources as well. These kinds of projects, depending on how much you have, can take years. So it's good to see what you have internally and maybe what you need help with, or if you might need external partners to help with these types of projects. Obviously, equipment, which, all of these relate back to each other. Equipment relates back to money. How many documents you have. also relates back to equipment. Are you going to try to scan with a batch scanner? Are you going to have to, scan one by one? Time is also an issue, and then, figuring out kind of what format you want these digital items to be in. So getting started, right? As I said, you need to plan. And for me, the first step is to assess the documents that you want to digitize. This has major repercussions, or rather can influence your decisions later on, like the second, choosing equipment. If you have, let's say, large format items such as posters, you're not going to be able to use a traditional scanner that you can buy in, any sort of media store. Maybe you need to find another solution. If you have damaged documents or, old textual documents, old photos versus printouts from a year ago, these are all going to influence the decisions you make when purchasing or borrowing, for example, different scanners or other equipment for digitization, which there are obviously other options. That also might influence, your ability to purchase equipment, and maybe you decide to outsource the digitization, which is standard practice in institutions who are doing large digitization projects. Third, and I'll get into this later, is kind of prepare the item. When I talk about metadata and file naming, I'll speak a little more about this. But this involves grouping documents of the same size so you could batch scan them at the same time, or grouping documents because they have some similar subject and you need to get those online first. So this is really just preparing yourself so that when it comes to actually scanning or digitizing, the process will be a lot smoother. And so then, you can kind of decide based on why you're digitizing these items, what metadata you want about them. What descriptive information do you want or do you need? It varies, right? Depending on why you're going to use these. If, let's say, you're able to make your items, their textual documents, you can OCR them and make them machine readable. Maybe you don't need to extract as much metadata. You just want to get the documents out there to the public. If these are things that are going to remain internal and it might be hard to find in 5 years when you're first going to use them, maybe you need more information. And then kind of the more technical part, deciding on your scanner presets and entering them, what file format you choose, what resolution, et cetera, and then obviously test it before you start the major digitization part. So a few words. I'm not going to get into the specific scanners, but I wanted to mention a few things that I've encountered with various digitization projects. First of all, usually when organizations are doing a digitization project, it's because they have a lot they want to digitize. It can be for preservation reasons a lot of the time. It's been documents that have been sitting around an office for years and really are going to start to deteriorate. Or it can be because, somebody received funding for a project and part of that project is digitization and they really need to get things done quickly. And then you have different types of items. Everything isn't textual. Maybe you have photographs, as I mentioned earlier. Maybe you have posters, publications even. These could be, even if they were originally digital, perhaps master files were lost, and now all you have is the print publications. And some other things I've seen are actual receipts. So depending, I think, in an ideal world, you want to be able to digitize quickly. It costs less, it takes less time. So that's why I have this bulk scanner versus flatbed. It's wonderful if you have documents that are in great shape, meaning not super creased or ripped, don't have, they're not uneven, they're not hard to read, pretty much new, very clean documents, then a bulk scanner is the way to go. You can feed them through. A lot of them hold, a lot of the less expensive ones can hold about 50 pages at once. And so this is a way to get the digitization done fairly quickly. That being said, even within a single group of documents, you might have some that are a little more weathered. And so it's good to have both on hand, a flatbed and a bulk scanner. A flatbed really allows you to get a better image, as it's laid straight down and it's scanning the whole image at once. It's not moving through. And then you can kind of tweak those documents a little more. I always suggest when you're doing these types of projects, if you do have kind of a mix between really, let's say, pristine documents, textual documents, right? Because photos you should scan on a flatbed or even film negatives. But if you have a mix, then as I said, group your documents depending on what kind of project you're doing and what information you want to extract from them. And then if you come across something that can't be scanned through, put it aside, do it later in a flatbed. But don't change the way you're doing the digitization for a small portion of the documents. And then others mentioning, maybe you have larger scale posters or books. I can't really think of a scenario right now, but even objects. And there's, some pretty interesting ways that you can take a digital SLR camera that obviously has, high megapixels and use that, set up a little digitization station with the camera, and then you can use editing software after if need be. So a little bit about metadata and file naming, and I'm going to switch the title and start with file naming. So, this goes back to grouping documents. You always want to have a meaningful file name. If you go through and you just scan everything and you call it receipt 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or, 2001 court cases, you're not going to find these documents again. You may, but it's going to take a lot of time and it's not the best route to go. That being said, you do not want to make the file names too long, because at that point, you're not going to be able to see it on your screen. And that's not where you need all the information. You should have a place where you can store other metadata. It doesn't all need to be in the file name. So, some do's. Do include the date. You can do just the year, depending on, as I said, what's good for you and what makes sense for the documentation you're digitizing. Do reference a creator, some point of context, or the original medium. Maybe you have a big mix, and this is really important for the way that you're going to share your digitized documents. So, maybe say that this was from a publication, or maybe say that this was from a photo. Have that be part of your file name. Perhaps the biggest one is do be consistent, because if you want to search through files easily, if you want to sort, you need to make sure that everything is formatted the same. or you may not find the document you're looking for. You may think it's been lost because it's not where it should be, etc. Don't use special characters or spaces depending on where these files are sent. That can cause some issues. And as I said before, don't include too much information. Another kind of note is to beware of personal identifying information. Depending on what you're digitizing, if the files pertain to persons in risk, you need to make sure that the file name does not reference these people. Keep a separate Excel sheet, etc., where within the organization you can kind of match these documents to, let's say, a specific case, etc. Yes, I will answer that as expert. But don't include this in the file name if this could cause somebody harm. So on to metadata. There's, depending, again, how this is going to be used, you need to think about what information you want to capture. It's always good to have creation information, regardless of how you're using this. So date of creation, creator, person or institution, location if it's necessary. You might also choose afterwards to describe it with subjects. If you are creating a collection that may go to an archive, some background information as well, where this collection came from, etc. Also, you might need to talk about rights. Perhaps these are documents that were gathered from multiple people. They have decided that they want to retain some of their rights. So you should find a way to include that as well. And caveat, this is not, the metadata and the file name are separate things. Okay, should I stop and answer the questions now? Okay, I'm going to finish the presentation and then I will get back to the questions, if that's okay.
Great.
Okay. So my next slide is just a little picture because this is something that makes me happy. If you have documents that are in good condition, they have, you have them grouped meaningfully, and you have that reflected in a file name, you can create, kind of a file name prefix that just through whatever software you're using, just adds a number on the end. And that's wonderful. It makes the process of naming much easier, and it helps you find the documents easier. That's not always the case, but it's wonderful when it is. Okay, so actually before this, which is just kind of my end slide, I'm gonna take a look at the questions. So Bert said he would like more details on metadata. What is the advantage of attributing them during the digitization process rather than afterwards on ready PDFs or other file types? So, as I said, I think you should put some information in the file name because it's a way of finding your files. You can't always create a meaningful file name for a lot of documentations. That makes the project a lot easier. If you can, I think it's really great. You have to think about how somebody is going to find these files and what they're going to be used for. So I don't know, say it's really important that, I don't know, these are documents from different regions of Europe. Well, I think it's important to have the file or the region name in the title because that's a way that people can more easily find it, especially if you work in a large organization. People are dealing with a specific area, but somebody completely different is doing this digitization process. It would help split up it would, it would help the people find the files they need to find. You know, if one person, let's say, is going to do this project from start to finish, maybe you can be, I don't want to say more lax in your file naming, because you should always think about meaningful file names. It's necessary, especially on large scale projects. But, you know, documents should not be described at the point of, you know, while they're being digitized. You don't want to include everything. You may not need the creator. You may not need a location. I think date is always a good thing to have in a file name. Does that kind of more or less answer your question, Bert?
Bert, I went ahead and unmuted you. I don't know if, did that answer your question, or did you have anything else? Okay, I'll assume that that was a great answer. And Yasmin also had a question.
Oh, he said was disconnected.
Oh, Bert, you'll have to listen to the recording. Sorry.
Should we do the rest of the questions at the end, do you think?
Let's just do Yasmin's question, and then
Okay.
we'll see if Yasmin can do her presentation. So
Okay.
Yasmin asked, oh, go ahead. You can go ahead.
Oh, you can read it.
Okay, the question is, if we have already digitized documents and archived them, but the file names using a software were given serial numbers, do you think it's worth it, necessary, to go back and rename all the files? They're basically UIDs in the format of 00001, 00002, etc.
So I think if these documents are already kind of connected to some other sort of meaningful information through, I don't know, say a content management system, it's not necessary to go back and rename them. If, however, they're just floating around on, you know, an external hard drive, then maybe if they're grouped in some sort of way, and it would be easy to rename large numbers of files at the same time, then that might be a good idea. You know, you never know kind of when staff is going to come and go, and new people come in and they don't have the background of the project. Oh, if they're part of the back end, then it's fine. No, there's no need to rename them.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nicole. Do you want to go ahead and finish up your presentation?
Oh, so this is, you know, a lot of things I didn't cover, but are definitely things you should think about within these projects. Our file formats, as I said, it varies, you know, depending on what your project is and what you mean to do with these digital items. Software, you know, you can always use kind of, in terms of scanning, the software that comes along with the scanner. There's also some open source options as well. Digital and physical storage, I think it's really good to think about not only where you're going to store your digital files, but then how you're going to maintain your physical ones. Some organizations may not keep these. They might not be necessary. But if you are keeping your physical items, then it's good to have a plan for that as well. And then obviously for preservation, I think if you're looking for long-term preservation and you're a small organization especially, really look at, you know, what kind of archives you know, either in the country you're working in or in other countries that might help you out with preservation. So that's all.
Thank you. And I think Elizabeth will have some more to say on preservation and digital storage. So Kiara, I see that you have a question about storage, and let's get to that after we have a chance to see Yasmin and Elizabeth's presentations, because I think they'll have something to say about this as well. Nicole, thank you for the presentation. That was super informative. Here we go. So when you're ready, why don't you go ahead and take it away.
Okay. I would explain a bit where I'm coming from and why I'm not going to talk very technically about digitizing. Swiss Peace is mandated by the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs to carry out a mandate which is called Archives and Dealing with the Past. We carry out this mandate together with the Swiss Federal Archives, and we work broadly around the question where archives, documentation, and memory work dealing with the past link, why archives are important for dealing with the past or transitional also called. And we work with governmental and non-governmental institutions around issues of archives, and obviously wherever we work, the question of digital archives, digitizing documents comes in. But I will more or less step back a bit from where we've been before and address some more general issues that we encounter when we work and questions around digitizing documents in digital archives come up.
Elizabeth?
The CIO, yes?
Sorry to interrupt you. It's a little bit hard to understand you. You're breaking up a little bit. I wonder if you could just hold the microphone maybe closer to your mouth, and maybe that would help.
Okay. Is it better?
It's not that much better. I don't know why it's breaking up. Hopefully it's clear for other people.
Try again. Is it better now?
Yeah, that's better. That's better.
Okay, good. So I will go a step back and again ask this question: why digital archives? If you're coming from an archival side, I'm not an archivist. I'm a lawyer, but I work a lot with archivists. It's always this question that comes up: is digital archives? It's not a measure for long-term preservation. If you come from the archival world, this is more or less what is considered as useful is to preserve your documents, if possible, in paper form. And then it's on one side because long-term digital preservation is not necessarily that much easier and cheaper than the traditional paper preservation of archives. Then the digitizing process is also quite complicated. We just heard that, and you cannot digitize probably all of your material, especially if you have large amounts of it. And then we always ask the question, actually, what do you digitize it for? And we've heard this question before. And the way you do it and the way you put it in order might differ quite a bit, depending on how you answer this question. You want to just keep it for yourself? Do you want to give access to others? Is it just because your material otherwise disappears because you don't have space? Or, and that's where we link in with our work, you want to use it, for example, in dealing with the past, in memory work, in transitional justice mechanisms. You want to use it online as educational material, in advocacy, and so on. So that's a very important question, because this question has to be asked at the beginning. Otherwise, you might do the whole digitizing process differently, depending on the answer. Then the question, what needs to be digitized? If you have the possibility to have a paper preservation, then keep in mind that it doesn't necessarily replace this preservation. Of course, this is different for digital form documents where you do not necessarily print out everything and keep it as a paper file. And then a very important point we always try to communicate when we work with organizations is it's important that first you put in order your paper records. If this is not done properly, it's very complicated to set up a proper digital archive. Somehow the digital archive reflects the paper archive. And it has been said before, if you do not do this ordering properly, then it's impossible to find things. It's the same as in a paper archive. And if paper archive is not done before, starting a digitizing process hasn't much sense. It also helps you to decide what needs to be digitized and what for. If you start digitizing one box just because it's the first box, and then it's all financial files or receipts that are maybe not that important and do not need to be digitized first because just it's not in order and it's not archived, then you get into troubles just because the amount is maybe too large to digitize everything. When we work on the question of digital archives, again, we ask, what is it used for in the future? We also say that it's try to keep the structure of your physical archive somehow reflected in the digital archive. With the digital archive, it's just a copy of what you have in your physical archive. And then make sure, and that we heard before in detail, that you add enough metadata to your digitized files so that you can use it as an archive. I have one example to illustrate it a bit. It's from SAHA, the South African History Archives, an organization we often work with, and they do projects with us. And they very carefully do their archival work. It's an archive, but they also use the archive. And if you see how they use the archive and how it is described, you can see how it's important it is to be able to trace back digitized documents to an actual archive. I'm using the example of this photo archive. It's a collection of photos of a Zimbabwean photographer, Samson Kobe, who had taken pictures during the liberation war in Zimbabwe. And SAHA has digitized parts of this collection. And again, I'm saying parts of it because it was just too much to digitize everything. So they first had to decide which photos could be useful for what they want to do with it, namely an exhibition, an online exhibition, a curated exhibition, and therefore they had to decide first what do we actually want to digitize, which photos could be used later on. So they didn't digitize everything, and here you can see how they actually link the item, the photo, to the archive, and how they are linking all the information, the archival information, to the photo, and how important it is to actually trace back where the photo is coming from, who took it, and of course this information doesn't have to be in the title, but it's metadata that should be added to an item if you have a digital archive that you want to use and that you want to publish and that you want to use in a curated exhibition. Now, another issue we are looking at is the question of archives at risk. It has been mentioned before, there are different risks that archives are facing. So it's neglect, lack of resources, lack of space, but there's also climate change, which can put archives at risk. There's one example we work with are the archives of the Nuclear Claims Tribunal in the Marshall Islands, where just security copies of parts of the archives had to be made in order to save the information. But the physical archives, they remain on the Marshall Islands, but we don't know what is going to happen to them. So security copies are now made and secured in actually the National Archives of Switzerland. Then obviously there are other risks, armed conflict, internal disturbances, risk from state actors, non-state actors, and there the risk might be as immediate that other measures are necessary and quicker measures are necessary than in other cases. And then archives containing sensitive information are at risk in certain political contexts. You've mentioned the historical archives of the National Police in Guatemala. Security copy of those archives have been exiled also to Switzerland just for security reasons. This information is public, so I can talk about it. On the end of the institutions that are offering a safe haven for archives at risk, there are several aspects we identified together with experts on those issues from different archives. They have to offer certain safety, perception of neutrality, and then, and here I put in red what is directly linked to the issue of digital archives and digitizing documents. They have to offer the technical infrastructure, sufficient security measures, stable long-term funding, because, as I said, digital archives are not necessarily less expensive than physical archives, because for long-term preservation, it's quite a complicated issue, and we can maybe discuss that as well. It's also something we usually explain organizations that if you have possibilities to physical archives, then keep that and make the digital really a security copy. Provide for accountability, transparency with working methods, and then again, a technical aspect, experience in handling the format that is to be transferred, and experience in handling sensitive materials, especially if parts of the collection of archives is accessible to the public, and human rights archives usually contain sensitive or information, so it's very important to make sure that this sensitive information is not getting to the public. And then obviously certain international standards and certification mechanisms should be guaranteed by the receiving institution in order to be really a safe haven. You can get more information about what we are doing on our website, and also about the issue of archives at risk and what have been found by the working group that was established on this issue. So I tried to open a bit the discussion to what is actually happening to digital archives, why can they be important, and how organizations that have archives at risk can think about security copies and the questions around those security copies.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was really helpful. I really liked hearing a specific example of South Africa. That was really nice. Okay, now let me go back to Yasmin. We're going to see if we can hear her, and if we can't, I'm going to read her presentation, and then we will discuss with the whole group. Let me mute Elizabeth, thanks again, and unmute Yasmin. Okay, Yasmin, do you want to try to say something? No. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and go through her slides, and she's going to type to me anything else she wants to add to what I'm reading. So this is the first slide, basic challenges of human rights and legal documents digitization. So it looks like the case files that she has been working with consist of prosecution interrogations, lawyer submissions, court verdicts, and supporting evidence, such as forensics and expert reports. Yasmin has experience with digitizing legal human rights documents only. She wanted to clarify that. Looking at the prosecution documents, I think what this means here is that 80% of the case documents are prosecution documents, and that these documents are handwritten on paper and photocopied from courts. Sometimes these documents are unreadable to the human eye, not to mention software like OCR software. And she includes an example here. It's a little bit dark, but I think you can understand what she's saying. And that would be incredibly hard. So she lists some of her major challenges. The first is the amount of case files accumulated in different NGOs over the past 20 years. I can only imagine how many files that would be. Yasmin wants me to hold on for a second. So she's saying that on this first challenge here, that because there are so many documents and case files, that there is a crackdown, and the organizations resort to bulk scanning without organizing. Oh, I see what you mean. Because there are so many files and because there is this government crackdown right now, they're just trying to scan as much as they can, and they're doing bulk scanning without organizing to archive the documents so that, I think what's going on is that the organizations are being closed by the government, and those documents will be destroyed. And so the only way to preserve and rescue these files is to scan them so that the digital copy can be shared with people outside of the country, if that's possible, or or even inside the country, she mentions. Okay, so the second challenge here is the quality of paper received from court. A lot of times tilted photocopies. Yeah, so it looks like the quality is pretty poor, and that would make scanning them very difficult. Another challenge is the lack of redaction from the court, which puts on a somewhat moral responsibility on the person publishing the material online. That's really interesting. Be curious to know if Nicole and Elizabeth have seen this before. The fourth challenge here is the scanning speed and personnel. So I think that this goes back to point number one, that there's so much happening so fast, in this context, that they're trying desperately to digitize as many documents as fast as they can, and it's posing a lot of questions or challenges. I imagine that getting your hands on hardware is also really difficult. Getting good quality scanners, I don't think you can even bring in new scanners into the country. So Yasmin says you give up a bit of quality for getting a lot of quantity done. I'm guessing it's even more than just a bit of quality. There are scanners. Okay, so Yasmin says that there are scanners. That's great. And then the personnel piece, I'm guessing that it's just hard to find the time to prioritize this kind of work. There's only so many people who can do this, and I'm sure that everybody has other jobs and they need to support their families. Okay, and also just to mention that digitizing and scanning these documents takes a lot of time. a lot of time. And I wonder if Nicole and Elizabeth could also speak to that when we're open for discussion. But I would imagine that human rights defenders could spend months doing this, depending on the kind of hardware that they're using. Yasmin also mentions that the NGOs themselves are preoccupied. They have so many other things to focus their work on right now. Okay, the fifth challenge here, digitization for the purpose of an established categorized system versus bulk scanning. Yeah, so this kind of goes back to a few of these other challenges that you need to scan these documents so fast. And of course, it would be great in an ideal situation that you could create this beautiful categorized system of all the documents so that you know what you're looking at. But unfortunately, that's just a really big challenge for groups in Egypt right now. And then the sixth challenge, question of publishing documents and ownership issues. I would be interested to hear more about that, but I can see how taking documents from a court and publishing them could be kind of tricky. Okay, so she says the court says it is public information. But you still need to go and pay a lot of money to get the decisions. Okay, well, this is a lot to unpack. Let me go ahead and unmute everybody, and we'll open it up for discussion. Yasmin's also adding that there's a gray zone here, that the repercussions for publishing these documents are not clear because of that paywall that the courts are putting in place. I'm going to unmute everybody. There's a question from Kiara about the storage of digitized documents. Would you recommend an encrypted cloud for storage? Also, Yasmin is adding to the discussion here that an additional challenge is also that Arabic fonts are tricky because there's not enough software that work with that font. I think that's what you're saying. Yeah.
The conference has been unmuted.
Okay, I've unmuted everybody. Maybe that wasn't the best decision, but we'll see how this goes. I'm going to start with Nicole. Do you want to address any of these challenges listed here or Kiara's question about storage?
Sure. I'll touch on a couple of these challenges because these are challenges that not only human rights organizations face, but also traditional archives. There's always a lack of personnel. There's usually a lack of funding. Especially, core institutional funding. A lot of funding does come from projects, but that means that you can only digitize certain collections, and you may not have time to get to others. But especially for smaller organizations dealing with human rights, this is a big issue because unless you have a project in mind that is really priority number one for the institution. There's a lot of things that come up really quickly. If you're working with human rights defenders, maybe kind of emergency situations, obviously those things take precedent over digitizing documents. And then, coming into the privacy aspect, it can be hard to bring people from the outside in, let's say interns or volunteers, to process these documents because there can be a lot of sensitive information within them. Depending on what country you're working in, what documents you're working with, you have to consider the country's privacy laws. and that might mean taking a lot of time to redact information from these documents. And that's obviously work that is very manual and very time intensive. I think, this is where you really have to take a step back and figure out what you can actually do. It's not something that's ideal. In the ideal world, we'd be able to make these documents, the documents we want to make public, we would be able to make them public, but that's often not the case. And so it really does take a lot of time to prioritize and to plan these types of projects. And then also on the point of like the question of ownership, if we're talking about, like, let's say for Yasmin's example of the court documents, yes, they're supposed to be public, but if you have to pay to get this information, who really owns it? Do you own it because you pay for it? But other people can pay for it as well. And if, once again, that includes personal information, if your organization publishes it, then you could face legal repercussions for this as well. And sometimes it's not worth the risk.
Thanks, Nicole. Elizabeth, I wonder if you had anything else that you wanted to add to this.
Yes, I fully agree what Nicole just said, and that brings me back to my point that right at the beginning, before starting to digitize anything, just to really very well answer the question, why are we doing it? What are we doing it for? It doesn't necessarily mean that material has to be published online, and a digital archive can also just sit somewhere and just parts of it can be used publicly. But the problem is, and this brings me to this very important question of whether to first categorize it and then start scanning. I think all this information, whether you have confidential information in it, where it's coming from, who is the author, all this information you might not find anymore once you've just bulk scanned everything. And then it's very difficult to reconstruct all this information, and you can only take it from the original paper archives, which are in the original order, where you can actually find all this information. So I see, of course, and I think, Yasmin, your problem is that you have to digitize a lot of material very quickly because of a situation of emergency. But I wonder whether even in a situation where you have extreme time constraints, as you say, at least have some kind of a system that you can later on identify where, what to actually digitize. Because once you have this bulk, you have no link anymore. Okay, you classify by case name. And did that still allow you, for example, in the file to find out which court documents were coming from which court and who you got it from? Because I'm also saying that with the view of how these documents are used and what the probative values could be of it. Anyway, the probative values of digitized documents is more limited than, or at least if you don't have this careful archival tracing back of where the documents came, then the probative value can be really, really a problem. And so I think this categorizing and adding metadata is still very important, especially if you really want to use the material later on. But when I say where the documents came from, for example, if you have a file and we saw a picture where you have, for example, this handwritten page, So in order to later on find out what this is, you need to add some metadata, and this metadata probably comes from the entire file. So if this is part of a prosecution notebook, or I don't know what it is exactly, then investigations, then you would need to add this metadata. It's coming from this prosecutor's office, it was taken then and then, this is page number 5, all in all there are 10 pages. So it needs some archival work in order to give the document the value that it needs. Especially if, and I'm not sure if this is the case, if the original paper archive is in danger and might be burned or got completely lost, then if you have a bulk of digitized material which you cannot actually trace back to where it came from, who has written it, then under what conditions, in what function, then the whole cognitive value of it is almost not existent. That is why this question of why categorizing before digitizing and adding the relevant metadata is relevant, especially coming from a transitional justice and dealing with the past perspective and from the perspective of how do you later on use this digitized document. I hope this was more or less understandable.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was really helpful. It makes me think that it must be really challenging to digitize so many documents when you don't necessarily know what the use of them will be. That, you know, a lot of times when we're doing digitization projects, we know why we're doing it. And so we can really think about how we want to categorize them and what we want to do with them. But in this example, we're just trying to save them. And so I can imagine that it's difficult to figure out what the right categories are and how much metadata is enough metadata to capture without trying to capture too much metadata because you just don't have enough time. I can see how this would be really challenging.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Of course, if you are in an immediate situation of risk, then it's very, very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yasmin is sharing that there's no time to implement categorization, so we just used folders with case names. I see. Is there any, do you guys have any ideas for how practitioners outside of Egypt might be able to assist in this kind of process?
Well, we practically what we have had cases where, you know, archivists went in and helped with this. So, but it's a long-term endeavor, you know. We just did it in a context which I'm not going to mention where it was, but it was an NGO that had not done the archival work for a long time, for 20 years. And after 20 years, they wanted to use their material, and they realized that without having it archived, they cannot do it. And they also wanted to digitize it and to use it, and it took months to actually archive it and then properly digitize it and secure it. And it was obviously not the situation of immediate emergency, but also a situation of risk. But it took quite some time with a professional archivist and a team of 3 local staff from the NGO to do this process.
Okay, thank you.
I think in countries it's difficult. It's more difficult.
Yeah.
More difficult to find people in the network who could actually do it in Arabic.
Yeah.
That was the question of Yasmin that came in. Yeah.
Bert, I want to turn to you and see if you have anything that you wanted to add from your experience. Any words of advice? But we can't hear you. I've unmuted you, but if you're talking, we can't hear you. I'm sorry, you guys, that there are so many challenges with the audio here. Oh, Bert, we can't hear you. Yasmin has to leave in a minute. Bert, if you have anything to share, feel free to type it, or you could try to reconnect. Let's turn back to Kiara's question about storage. What do you guys think? I mean, are groups storing their digitized documents on Dropbox? That's kind of not a serious question, but where are groups storing their documents? And is it recommended that it would be on an encrypted server? Also, I'd be curious to know, is it possible to have the files encrypted as you're digitizing them? So can you connect the scanner to your computer and have it digitized directly to an encrypted USB stick, for example? I could unmute everything.
The conference has been unmuted.
I've never dealt with encrypting upon digitization, but I'm sure there are some ways you can do that. You know, it would probably take an extra step maybe after you've digitized, but I think you could go in batches and encrypt it, you know, after you do so many. And I just wanted to mention one other thing about Yasmin's example with, you know, her having to really digitize these documents really quickly. If they're not going into some sort of content management system, and if you really don't have the time to really plan, categorize, add metadata afterwards, a really rough solution is to even kind of write out or type out kind of cover page for, let's say, for each case file with the information that you have on it. How you receive this file, you know, dates if they're not listed in the documentation, maybe what court they came from, etc. And if you're packaging them, let's say, in a folder by court case, to just have that document, either something that's written and scanned or a Word document that you save with it there. So if they do end up going to some sort of central system within an organization later, then you can kind of extract some metadata points from that.
That's a great idea. Thanks, Nicole. Elizabeth, do you have any experience securing digitized documents once they're online, once they're digital? Any like best practices or ways that other groups have done that?
Well, we had the discussion around the issue of securing archives at risk, and well, we were a bit split. Part of the group said a cloud with encrypted documents is safe enough, and others said, oh, they would never do it for confidential and sensitive information. And so concretely, I cannot really say what I would recommend. But encryption for sure is a solution, but technically, I cannot really answer also the question whether it can be done automatically while you scan. And but sensitive information in a cloud, in my view, is a bit a hot issue. But there are organizations who do it. I know from certain contexts.
Okay, thank you.
We haven't encountered problems at the moment, but I mean, you never know what can be hacked and how sophisticated the hacking is. So, on the other hand, even if you store it locally, there's a risk that information can be accessed and taken away. So probably the reality that it's never ever really secure.
Yep, that's a good point. Well, hopefully we can explore this question further in the forum.